And I think as we're 4 minutes after and it's everybody's lunch break, I'll hand it over to David to get us started.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. My name is David Black, as Andrew said. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm speaking to you from the Halkomelem speaking peoples' traditional and ancestral territories. In many of you will know that as this part as New Westminster. And I am the past president of Move Up, the union that represents the inside workers at many places in British Columbia, but for this purposes, at Fortis Electric, Fortis Gas, and BC Hydro. So we have experience with the energy systems right across British Columbia. And I want to acknowledge right off the top that a lot of the work and the research done on this project was done by our staff person, Norm Gludovitz, and actually was inspired by work that he had been exposed to when he worked with the Green Jobs BC over the past 15 years or so, and outlined in Seth Klein's book, The Good War, which absolutely is an inspiration for this. So I'll jump right into it. We have looked at the climate challenge facing British Columbia and came up with an idea that we think could help not only help British Columbia meet its climate change targets, but it also can help to build a better, more affordable British Columbia. It will help to fight climate change and meet our climate change targets. It will help to grow the green economy. It will help to create good paying, sustainable jobs and careers. And it also brings an opportunity to increase equity in the both the labor market in British Columbia, but also in the area around housing as well. So if it sounds like a bit of a panacea, if I'm selling that, I will say that the more research that we did in preparing this and refining it, the actually better it sounds rather than the more difficult it sounds. So we are quite excited about it. What we are proposing is that the British Columbia government creates a new Made in BC agency to coordinate building retrofits that maximize the reduction in greenhouse emissions from buildings in British Columbia and maximizing the number of jobs and spin-off economic activity comes from that. We are agnostic about what form that agency should take. Originally, we were proposing that be added to the BC Hydro mandate. The reason why we are not saying that today is because we got some feedback from government initially that BC Hydro is busy with the mandates that it's have, and that tasking it with additional tasks would overwhelm BC Hydro. And just from my experiences representing the people who work there, I can say there is some truth to that. But we're agnostic to whether this happens with BC Hydro or in a new agency, as our initial feedback from government provided us. For us, the agency would take a people-centered approach with a one-stop shopping response team for people who are interested, for people, businesses, or in fact governments that are interested in improving the energy efficiency in the greenhouse gas situation with their buildings. So it's important to take that people-centered approach because buildings don't retrofit themselves. Somebody is making that decision, whether that's a homeowner, a landlord, a renter, a business owner, or a government or a nonprofit agency or something like that. There's people at the end of the day that need to make those decisions. And so that's why rather than addressing it strictly from the building sense, we've tried to approach it from a people-centered sense. So it's no secret to anybody on this call that British Columbia is at least in part exacerbated by what's been going on in Ukraine and Russia. There may be some further complications or stresses put on the energy system based upon what's going on in Gaza and Israel right now. We know that the world and British Columbia are undergoing an economic affordability crisis for working people and middle-class people, including rapid inflation, although that seems to be coming down a bit now, unaffordability of housing and stresses on food and the precarity of jobs. It's all been made worse by the pandemic in these current crises. We are obviously in a climate emergency as well that threatens lives, communities, and our economies. We've seen flooding, we've seen heat domes, we've seen forest fires and violent storms. And while British Columbia has done a lot to get us on track to reducing our climate targets, there is still a gap, and we believe that there's more to do, and that this program would help to achieve those goals. And finally, we still live in a society where there is systemic inequity that manifests itself in exclusion from work, from career opportunities, from education, from healthcare, and in people's housing situations. So again, the good news is we think that we have a program that will help to address many of these things. And it's found in retrofitting our buildings to make them more resilient and efficient. So the goals of our BC Building Energy Retrofit program are, first of all, to build a people-centered energy retrofit program that provides one-stop shopping for grants, applications, and information, and also reaches out directly into the community. So more proactive than the PACE programs that British Columbia relies upon now, and in fact, many other jurisdictions. PACE is Property Access Clean Energy Programs. We think this agency will help to reduce BC's greenhouse gas emissions by decreasing energy loss from buildings through retrofits, and in fact can hasten and facilitate switching, decarbonizing our buildings as well. We want to build the retrofit program that increases equity in British Columbia, and that's going to do that a few ways. First of all, by reducing energy poverty and increase affordability through decreased energy bills for people who access these programs, to kickstart and enhance training and hiring programs that recruit new workers from Indigenous and racialized communities, women, and people with disabilities. We know that British Columbia is in a housing crisis. We know there's almost everyone who wants to work or is qualified to work with in the highly skilled home building business is busy. So if we are going to do more work, it's going to require more workers, which provides these opportunities to address some equity in that housing market, in the house building market, and the retrofit labor market. And also to reduce energy poverty in BC by targeting greater funding to lower income communities. And I'll get into that last one a little bit more later. The fourth thing it does is it creates sustainable jobs that strengthen people and communities. You hear a lot about micro-skilling people for very specific jobs. The problem with micro-skilling folks is that once that job is done, they aren't necessarily qualified for the next job. So we take the approach that that when people are going into these training programs, they should be trained as journey people with the full scope of the abilities and full scope of the skills, so that they can go from project to project to project, or building to building to building, and that they are in fact these are careers that we're creating. They're not just one-stop jobs that last a few months or a year or two, and then they're back looking for new work and new skills. We also think that if this is done properly, it can create a made in BC energy efficiency manufacturing sector. We're not the only jurisdiction struggling with all of this, and we think that if we can get on the leading edge of that, we can help to kickstart manufacturing for a lot of the equipment and the supplies that are needed to do these retrofits. The worldwide shortage of heat pumps isn't as bad as it was a few years ago, but it's still a challenge when doing retrofits. So we think we could have a domestic industry building heat pumps here. We also think that we can coordinate bulk buying of energy efficiency building materials to reduce the costs for the end user. So reduce the costs for the homeowner, the landlord, the renter, the business or the government that is doing these things. Because if we harness the buying power of government, the costs will come down and come down significantly, making this more accessible for a lot of other people. So when we look at the current effectiveness of retrofit programs, several shortcomings come out immediately. They ultimately do not have the depth and reach to make the necessary change. And so while the government is quite, and many governments, and I should say it's not just the provincial government, the federal government has programs, many local governments have programs, and there's also private foundations that are providing assistance as well. But what ends up happening in these self-selecting systems is that often the benefits are flowing to people who don't really need them. They probably would have been doing the retrofits anyway because of their awareness level and because their socioeconomic position gives them the latitude to make those decisions. Consequently, it's often people who are already in fairly energy efficient buildings. What we say this program can do and should do is reach those people who otherwise can't afford it, who are living paycheck to paycheck, raising families, perhaps seniors who aren't as sophisticated, who are more likely to be living in less energy efficient buildings. So there's more savings in terms of greenhouse gas emissions that can go into that. There's more energy savings to be recouped by that. Plus, it addresses some of that inequity in that folks that can't really afford it or it's beyond their capacity and other means, this would make that more accessible for them. Many studies, and we've done a lot, have shown that these grant incentive programs that we have now fund the free rider. So people, as I said, who are going to be doing it anyway, in fact, up to 30% of the money just goes to people who would have done it anyway. So it hasn't actually incented anything. So the challenges, those are the challenges that we've talked about. One of the other challenges is that the current programs are overly complicated. I know when we were advised about 12 years ago that our boiler was on its last legs. We wanted to look at heat pumps. We wanted to look at all sorts of programs. We wanted to explore solar. We wanted to look at our insulation, and we wanted to see what assistance was out there. And it was extraordinarily complicated, even for someone as motivated as myself. When we went about going to do that, we did some preliminary research. We started to search out some contractors. And without fail, the contractors talked us out of it. They said it was going to cost us too much money. It was going to take too long to obtain the necessary supplies and equipment, and that the return to us eventually, we would never recoup the savings and the energy savings. So we simply got the same equipment but more efficient. And I'll get into that later, how that when people make those decisions is a significant lost opportunity, not just in the short term, but in fact in the long term. Current programs are not based on science and outcomes. We know that the more proactive a program is, the more effective it is in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and addressing social policy goals. That the PACE programs, while they're relatively easy to set up, they are very, very difficult to access, and they are not effective at achieving goals. Our supply chain is broken. We know that the current competition model incents individual contractors or individual property owners to go out and try and get their retrofits done. But it means that people are buying heat pumps on a one-off basis or from resellers, and the prices that they're paying are much higher than they would be if it was coordinated. And also, it's the lost opportunity. We know that that there are, despite our economy and the housing shortage, there are still there are still communities that are under engaged in the workforce. And we know that British Columbia and globally, there's going to be a shortage of skilled workers, skilled trades workers and journey people for the generations to come. So if we can help to get those people those skills and those qualifications and certifications, they will have careers that will likely last a lifetime rather than just jobs that last months or years. Further, the investigation that we've done has shown that it actually pays for government. For every dollar that's invested in retrofitting buildings, it creates many jobs. In fact, more than just about any other industry that we were able to look at. So an average of 9.5 direct and indirect jobs are created for every $1 million invested in energy efficiency. That's a huge return in investment in terms of employment. There are other savings for government as well. Increasing this economic activity found that it saves money on healthcare. Many of these older buildings that aren't necessarily energy efficient also don't have great filtration systems. Many of them have, in British Columbia, have no system for cooling. And so when we hit pandemics and building ventilation is important, many buildings, including public buildings, are woefully inadequate in British Columbia when we have heat domes. And I'm not going to speak about that in the past tense because we've had them, but we will have them again. And people do not have proper cooling in their homes. There are healthcare costs, and unfortunately, there are tragic human circumstances that fall from that. These things can be addressed and should be addressed through a proper retrofit program. So every dollar that the public invests in this infrastructure has been projected to save $3 to $6 in recovery costs. So the government actually saves money through this as well. It's not a cost for government. I talked about new jobs in manufacturing. BC plans changes to the BC Energy Step Code, which will help new buildings by 2032 and will drive an increase in supply chain. There's no reason why that gap in the supply chain can't be met by British Columbia businesses, either existing or new British Columbia businesses. Eventually, some of this is going to bleed over into Alberta. They will need these materials. Washington State, Oregon, and so on are all suffering from the same supply chain issues that we are in British Columbia, and there is space for a domestic market to be developed in this regard. Research shows that major tax benefits for government and GDP growth result from retrofitting. Study by the Pembina Institute in 2021, the financial benefits for government investment isn't altruistic at all. For every dollar invested in retrofitting, government can see anywhere from $2 to $5 returned in taxes, in terms of sales taxes, in terms of payroll taxes from the employment that created. So it actually is a way not only to generate economic activity, but actually generate government revenue in the medium term. It's not even a long-term thing. The same research measured the impact retrofitting has on the economy. Estimates show that for every dollar spent, there's $2.30 growth in GDP. At scale, $1 billion investment would see a $2.3 billion growth in GDP, create 9,500 new good-paying jobs, and generate between $2 and $5 billion in taxes and government. So we see that this is a way of protecting family-supporting jobs, creating new family-supporting jobs, providing just transition. I use that term here, just transition, in the broadest sense, not only to protect people who are, not only to provide opportunity for people who are transitioning from the carbon economy, but in fact, provide opportunities for people who are left out of the current economy. One of the key advantages of MoveUp's involvement in this change is our ability and desire to work on solutions that support our members who work at BC Hydro and our members at FortisGas who are going to be needing transition opportunities in the future. And so we think that the leadership of the government in BC Hydro can make a huge difference here. I do want to talk quickly. cognizant of the time, about the affordability and the cost of living in British Columbia and the challenges here. We are still in a period of very high inflation. Most of that is not being reflected in wage increases for British Columbians. And so the cost of housing is going up faster than wage increases. The cost of retrofits is going up faster than wage increases. So all of these things are becoming more and more unaffordable. Reducing energy poverty through building retrofits has a higher reduction of GSG emissions, and it creates more jobs, and it helps to helps to address the unaffordability crisis, or the affordability crisis that we're experiencing right now. We have suggested that the programs that the federal government have put in around retrofits and incenting retrofits should be married with the programs that we have here in British Columbia, both in terms of the provincial government, local governments, and many of the foundations that are doing that. By having multiple different funders, all with different requirements to access the funding, and all with different criteria to achieve funding, it makes it very, very difficult for people to navigate those systems. So that drives people away from the system, as it did with us. And B, it means that there's often money left on the table. And it's also going to those free riders, as I was talked about before. So I think that we think that coordinating that through a public agency in British Columbia will make that a lot simpler for people, and in fact, a lot more efficient for the funders. Their money will go where it's most needed and where it reduces the greenhouse gases most per dollar invested, and creates the most opportunities per dollar invested. It's important for folks to remember that BC is more than just Metro Vancouver. Rural British Columbian Indigenous communities have their own challenges that are separate from that when it comes to British Columbia. Metro Vancouver or Metro Victoria, or the Capital Regional District. So when we talk about a public agency, it's able to be more proactive in reaching out to those folks with tailor-made those communities with tailor-made solutions for those communities. That means a greater economy of scale and efficiency. It's very, very expensive if you're in an isolated community or a standalone building in rural British Columbia to get these things done, but a public agency can bring the economies of scale that make that a lot more affordable. If we continue to rely purely on a strategy of people and self-recruiting, we lose the efficiency that comes from the economies of scale, and it's reflected elsewhere in this proposal. Self-recruitment favors more higher income participants who form a high percent of the free ridership. I want to talk quickly about the impact of an intersectional analysis to promote equity. Indigenous racialized residents of the province, as those working with disabilities, women and youth, are more likely to be or lower income employment and face challenges with respect to labor force attachment and affordability. This proposal, by creating many, perhaps tens of thousands of jobs, additional to the jobs already existing in this industry, provides multiple benefits for historically marginalized people and oppressed peoples, affecting affordability, labor force attachment, and climate adaptation. So these training programs should be targeted at those communities specifically, as well as people that are transitioning out of the carbon economy. One of the successes of similar programs is an investment in training and job creation targeted to Indigenous and racialized people, women, youth, and people with disabilities. This has been tested. Portions of this have been tested in other jurisdictions, and they have been successful at that. What we have learned from looking at other retrofit programs around North America, and in fact around the world, is that this program can and would address equity issues, both in terms of the labor market that I've talked about, and in terms of people accessing retrofits for their homes, for their buildings, for their commercial buildings. BC has an opportunity to target more energy efficiency program investments towards an action on renewable energy poverty. This could include targeting greater programs towards social and low-income housing, which are very difficult for folks to for government to find the capital to do this investment. We've met with Metro Vancouver Housing, who are very excited about this proposal because they would like to increase the energy efficiency of their building. They just don't have the capital to do that, especially when the demands for new housing are so high. A program like this would also allow area-based approaches where rather than just one house in one block, you would be able to do 8 houses in one block. Reducing the transportation costs, reducing the costs of supplies by economies of scale, making it easier to have tradespeople working in an area. So it's much, much more efficient, but it requires the higher level of coordination. I want to talk really quickly about the deeper value of retrofits because there's a greater value to that. We know that when people do a retrofit, whether that's just doing insulation, just doing windows and doors, just doing a heating system, just doing a cooking system, just doing their water system, they're less likely to do another retrofit. So it's important to do all of those things at once to get that very deep retrofit, do all of those aspects at once, provide that and as much support to the building, the people responsible for the building, and you get that bigger bang for the buck. I think that I will wrap it up there and turn it back over to Andrew and look forward to the session coming up.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. It's right on time. And that was actually fascinating about the deep retrofit at the end. I hadn't actually heard that before. Thank you for the presentation. I have to say it hits 3 big markers that we've talked a lot about around the coalition table. Obviously, emission reduction, also removing barriers to access for people to join the workforce. And this idea of hands-on solutions that we can do where we live here in British Columbia, because we are obviously seeing the effects firsthand. So yeah, thank you very much for that presentation. I'm now really pleased to invite a couple of guests to join us so we can dig in a little bit deeper to this conversation. Guerra Marin is the Communities Director and Just Transition Lead for Iron and Earth. And Darla Simpson is the Retrofit Program Manager for ZEBx. I will turn it over to all 3 of you. And thanks again, David.
Thank you.
Well, I guess I can say where I'm speaking. Hello, everybody. I go by she, they. I'm Guerra Marin. I'm originally from Colombia, the country, and I am speaking to you from the lands of the Lekwungen and Simpsons people. And yeah, this is a very interesting conversation. I'm very happy to be participating.
I guess to round it out, Darla Simpson, I'm joining from the unceded territories of the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh. And yeah, I really, really appreciated the presentation, David. I think you've surfaced some of the conversations that we're having internally through our retrofit programs, and specifically how better to support the workforce that we anticipate needing for the scale of retrofitting that needs to happen to achieve our 2050 targets. And that includes both mid-career professionals that may want to move into this space, but also just a tremendous demand and expansion of the folks working in the building industry. And I'm curious if you have any insights you can share with us around how do we start to engage those audiences in these conversations and get them into the skilled trades programs, get them the apprenticeships. Like, what are the barriers that they're facing, or do you have a sense of what that might be?
Yes, so I think in respect with the one group you talked about, people already are already skilled tradespeople already, is that they know what they know, and the longer you're in a career, the more intimidating it is to learn new skills, and so addressing that on one part. On the other hand, you can slowly, there's lots of work for those people currently, probably enough to get them to end of career, and you can train the new workers in the new skills. For no one in British Columbia who has a skilled trade is looking for work right now. It's very high capacity. In terms of the new workers, I think that it's important what you've said is a really important question to ask, because what we don't want is just more of the same. So we don't want the same people, or not just the same people, pardon me, attracted to those industries that currently have, because that just perpetuates the inequities that are there. So the training programs have to be very, very proactive about reaching out to women, reaching out to people with disabilities, reaching out to Indigenous communities, reaching out to racialized communities to make sure that the programs are open and accessible to those people. That means working with those communities. We have had some success in developing this proposal, talking to some of those groups. Certainly, I would not suggest that we have all the answers. I think that's an iterative process that's important to get right off the bat. So it's not just, quite frankly, more white men going into the building trades industries. We do know that these skills are going to be in demand for a very long time. And so we're talking about careers for folks that is different than just a make work project. And I think it's quite exciting and provides those opportunities, but making sure that you have those, making sure that the barriers are not there from the start is important. And that means working with those communities when developing the training programs. Some of the unions in the building trades do have their own training programs. And I know that they're grappling with those issues. They probably could use more support in opening up those programs to more diverse communities. You know, there's all sorts of challenges. There's economic challenges, there's cultural challenges, there's geographic challenges. And the scale of what we're proposing, we think, helps to address a bunch of those. So it certainly doesn't address all the problems, but it does make them, the scale does make it easier to bring the resources to bear that helps to alleviate those barriers, I think.
That's very interesting and throughout your conversation. So just to show a little bit of what I do, I've been doing a lot of in-depth engagement in various areas in Canada, and we're actually doing our first session in Surrey on Saturday if you want to come in. But anyways, what we're finding in partnership with the Vancouver Sustainable Workforce Coalition, sorry, forgot the shout out there, but what we're finding actually, which is quite interesting when we're having conversations. So we've had conversations in downtown Edmonton, we've had conversations in rural Alberta, and what we're finding is actually people are concerned about affordability and accessibility, and they are very concerned about access to retrofits, and they're bringing all those points that you're indicating. And it's so interesting because, you know, one of the things that we always like, that we knew, but it's important that, you know, the data shows it, because you can say whatever, but if the data doesn't present it, then, you know, it's that there is a huge difference between access from a rural perspective, which you sort of brought up, to the urban perspective. And another big thing is between renters and homeowners.
Yes.
So that is huge. And because a homeowner, whether or not they have this socioeconomic status that you bring, at least they could get access to some rebates. A renter cannot. Like, even though you pay for your utilities, you don't have, like, you cannot improve. You cannot be like, you know what, I want to pay less utilities, so I'm going to install a heat pump. That just is not going to happen, unfortunately. So what we're finding a lot is that people are identifying those gaps. And I mean, obviously, we can't say that this program is the panacea for all, but I think you do bring into that consideration about being able to tailor. I think that is critical, which is quite intriguing for me, because if it's government owned, like how flexible can it be? Because the other bit that I think is very important tied to that is that flexibility also needs to happen at the energy efficiency advisor part. So like, even before the retrofit, to know what kind of assessment I need in my house, and the differences in price between doing that assessment in rural areas versus urban areas. And outside of price, length. So for example, someone wants to do it in a rural place, they normally have to pay the transportation fee because the assessment advisor, is in the urban area, and then they're booked for like 7 to 8 months. So anyway, so there's a lot of like those tiny intricacies. I don't know. I mean, obviously, again, I don't expect that you have all the answers, but I'm interested to know what your thoughts are with what you're finding.
Yeah, you've hit on one of the things that we hadn't solved and we've struggled with. So thank you for highlighting that, because I think it's important to get different perspectives on this. So yeah, there's a mismatch currently in it, not just in rental housing, but in fact, leased premises for commercial businesses, is that the people paying the utilities are often not the homeowner. So while the person paying the utilities may have an incentive for lower energy costs, they don't have an incentive to make the capital investment. And the same on the landowner or the building owner. They may have an interest in the capital investment, but they don't realize the savings on the energy. In order to align that, we need to, British Columbia needs to tie the utilities to the landlord rather than to the tenant, both commercially and residentially. I'm sure there's people who could outline huge problems with that, but I'm just shooting off my mouth right here on that. But that would help to create that alignment. So I don't know, because it is very much a very real nut that we've struggled with in terms of making that incentive for both the renters and the landlords to want to engage in this.
Yeah, because if they do that, oh sure, then you get renovicted. It's like,
exactly,
I'm just gonna charge $400 more of rent because I just put a heat pump. So it is very interesting, because we're trying to fight a very profit-based work, like, you know, because housing is not seen as a human right, it's seen as an asset. Right. So I'm wondering if like, you know, we need to go a little bit deeper, but maybe that's the conversation for it.
Well, it's a huge problem. In some ways, what we're proposing would be easier in a market with a lot of unemployment, which we have significant communities of unemployment, but not general unemployment in British Columbia. And if there was a depressed housing market, because then it's, you know, people can move out to get those deep retrofits done. You can't really do a deep retrofit and live in or operate a business in the place where that's being done. But we know people are unhoused. And so there isn't housing to move folks into. So it really, you know, this program really needs to, if it's going to be successful or practical, it needs to be done in conjunction with a significant efforts to just deal with the housing crisis and the affordability crisis generally, because in some ways this could exacerbate those problems in the short term for sure.
Well, actually, you just hit the nail, like, you know, whatever, in the head or whatever. Sorry, I don't remember how the saying goes.
That's right.
Actually, there is an organization, like there's a company that's trying to do a geothermal project seen as renewable in Hinton, Alberta right now. And so they're tying it to greenhouses and then doing all this work, and they don't have labor. Like there's not enough trained labor in Hinton to do it. But that's not even the issue. The issue is housing. They don't, even if they were to bring workers to do the work, they don't have where to put them. So right now, even if you are trying to do major installations in rural areas, you know, there is no place to house the workers there. And that brings us back to how oil and gas sites go, that they create a camp and they create different things. So it just, there has to be some systemic issues that need to be changed, because as you say, it cannot be in silos, because then we're just perpetuating an issue that we've seen over and over again replicate itself, right? So
well, I think to one of the issues you brought up, Anna, like we actually need these resources in our remote communities. We have to stop exporting them from our major municipalities out into these regions, because quite frankly, they're not the best equipped to know what the folks in those regions need, what the specialized technologies might be. So how do we do better at reaching the folks in these rural communities and introducing them to these opportunities? These are great jobs. These are jobs that are, you know, they have lots of warm fuzzies. They're socially rewarding. They're doing good for the environment. Like I can say, having worked in this space, we do have a lot of folks incoming from oil and gas who are like, I didn't like what I was doing there, but I like what I can do here. How do we get that message out into our more rural communities? And how do we demonstrate to them the demand for this work? Because having delivered some of these programs, I hear, well, you know, we want to support this program, but there's not an energy advisor in our region. We can't pay for one to come from Metro. So I feel it's a push-pull question for me.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that we think that the experience of our union in being involved in Crown corporations, we do have people who do this work at BC Hydro. We have these people that do this work at Fortis, although maybe their alignment's a bit out of whack with what we're suggesting here right now, but they certainly have the skills and the knowledge. And at Fortis Electric in the Kootenays and part of the Okanagan. And so it is about those economies of scale. We don't want everybody based in Vancouver doing this work. But if the program is large enough, then you can put centers in Kamloops, in Prince George, in Fort St. John, in Bella Coola. You're not going to be able to get people into every community in British Columbia, but you can get them a lot closer than they are now and a lot more accessible. You know, internet access is absolutely an issue in parts of the province. If you don't have an internet access, forget accessing any of the programs we have now. Like, people would have to leave their community, go to a library, and spend a couple of days doing research on stuff. What's really important is that these programs are packaged in a way that's very easy to understand and very easy to uptake, and that's done proactively. You can't do that by just waiting for people to come to you. You have to go to them, and that's about the economies of scale. Initially, when we started talking about that, we were concerned about the cost, because there's hiring people and having them dispersed around the province is not inexpensive. However, once they start doing that work, the economic activity and the taxes generated, in fact, do pay for itself. So it does take an initial investment, but it does pay back government very, very quickly, which is why we've argued that it should be done publicly. And that's essentially the basis of Seth Klein's book as well. The private sector can't actually do this in an efficient manner. It requires the economies of scale and the ability to purchase goods at bulk that only government can bring to the table, or a crown agency of some sort.
I would say there's some, we were doing work in the Northwest Territories this year. Sorry. And one of the things that I first realized with very remote communities is that there is no industry to speak of. So even coming to a place very remote, jobs are not the main source of concern, because the industries are very specific, and there's not so sometimes a way to address that is, again, tied up to housing. So if we tie it in to make sure that all the houses in town have, for example, solar panels, then you do need someone that can do maintenance. And so then you're creating some sort of industry. And so I think, again, it's going back to not being silo, because Kamloops, Kootenay, like that. But if you start going more remote, then there is no industry, or the houses are modular, or and again, you may have to, that's why it's so important to again, not have an industry, because maybe what you need is you have to have, let's say, a group of energy advisors that kind of go around let's say northern BC, that doing that work, but it's all kind of in a collaborative effort, I would say.
Yeah, and there actually are examples of this, not just around the world, but locally in British Columbia. The Souk First Nation has developed a solar project themselves that provides energy, has provided the skills, the training opportunities to their folks, and the maintenance of those things that you were talking about, Anna. And they did that on their own. Think of what could happen if it was actually incented by government programs. Galliano Island has a neighborhood energy program based on solar power. They did that themselves. So there's folks out there who are willing to do this work. It just needs to have those barriers reduced and have the incentives put in front of folks. You talked earlier about geothermal. I was crazy enough when I was thinking about, well, maybe geothermal energy would make sense for my house. It does not make sense for an individual building owner or homeowner to do that. But on a community-wide level, it absolutely can make sense in different circumstances. So there's all sorts of opportunities that right now aren't practical, but at scale, they suddenly become very, very practical. But it requires the scale to do that, and we're not at scale right now.
I would also say, one of like, you probably include them, but migrant and immigrant workers are also a very, like, obviously with certain labor protections, which is very important. So it's just that labor protection bit, but there is a very big untapped market of workers. I have currently, there's so many, like, I'm a geological engineer. I graduated from geological engineering in Colombia, and I did work in oil and gas and other extractive industries. And I was lucky enough that when I came here, I was able to get a degree from a Canadian university, so I was able to continue working related fields. There's a lot of folks that cannot access accreditation or work, and they are civil engineers. They have 20 to 30 years on this thing. They may even already have renewable energy experience. So there's a lot of folks that are not even able to access this industry. And so again, it's that push that it just cannot be allowed just for the corporate to do it, because then they can just create that sort of migrant worker, you come 6 months, you leave. But that there is a lot of folks that are able to help out to create that infrastructure, along with, you know, Indigenous folks and women and folks with disabilities.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said, Anna, and I'm thinking about the paper that we'll distribute later. I think we need to say that explicitly about migrant workers and credentialing and labor protections for those workers as well. This is what I like about doing the proposal, is that every time I propose to a different group, we get good suggestions on how to improve the proposal. So
I'm curious, I know that you're not a big fan of micro-credentialing, David, but I'm wondering, is there potentially a role for micro-credentialing in that situation where we could help folks coming into the country to learn more about the specific applications here, or the, you know, the codes and standards that would be required, and what could that look like?
So it depends on what you mean by micro-credentialing. So if we're talking about folks that Anna's mentioned who have credentials from a foreign jurisdiction that aren't necessarily recognized here, if that is about giving them the ability to be credentialed here as a journey person, then I would be all in favor of that. But if it's about I don't want to take up too much time, but we had a situation where BC Hydro switched over to smart meters from regular analog meters, and they did that through micro training folks. So people were trained specifically how to take out the old meter and to put in a new meter. But as soon as that work was done, they can't do electrical work on a house. They can't do electrical work on a building. So as soon as that contract's done, they don't have any more job opportunities. So what we think needs to happen is that people need to be credentialed to do the full scope of that particular trade. It is a bit more expensive. It's perhaps a bit slower, but in terms of training people on very, very specific tasks, that should be done within those overall certifications from our point of view, because otherwise you're just perpetuating the inequities. People who can only do a small part of the jobs, they cannot compete in terms of wages that someone who's more qualified can do. We saw a number of instances where people doing that smart meter work encountered unexpected issues that they weren't trained to handle. Some meters blew up, people's houses got on fire. It wasn't a great number, thank goodness, but that probably wouldn't have happened if it was a fully qualified tradesperson doing that work. I know that our comrades in the building trades are very concerned about micro-credentialing. Getting their support was very important for us and part of that proposal, and making sure that people were fully credentialed to do the full scope of the journey person job is important to them and is important to us.
Thank you, David. As you said, we're almost at time. I wanted to take one question. Coyote Taylor had wanted to jump in, so I'd like to pass the microphone over to him, and then I think we'll start to wrap stuff up here.
Yeah, Coyote. I'm not sure if I was going to say a question, but it was more just a comment. When you're referring to remote communities, I come from a community on my mom's side called Skidegate, where they did a widespread heat pump installation. And so one of the things to think about when you're doing remote communities is not only the training to service them after the fact, but the amount of people that are trained. So we had one person for the whole island who could service heat pumps. And so if your heat pump had a problem with it, you were looking at like a 4 to 6 month wait. which doesn't, for the people that are adopting it, it doesn't show to the reliability of it, because it's just like, well, I'm going back to my wood stove anyway because my house is cold. And then he recently retired, and then you're at this huge deficit. So not only just like the training for that one person, making sure there's enough jobs for redundancy so that people don't have to wait long, and so that it has the same reliability that gas or electric furnaces do.
Yeah, if I can just add on that, I completely agree, Cody. And this is another argument I would against microscaling, because if all that person is doing is the heat pumps, they're not doing other electrical work, so they're waiting for heat pumps to break in a place like Skidegate or on Haida Gwaii, and not able to do other work. And if you've got 20 electricians who can handle the heat pumps, more economic opportunities, and there's more support for the equipment once it's actually put in, rather than just relying on one person who's, you know, able to service that one piece of equipment.
No, exactly. Thank you, Kiri. That's a great example. Thank you. And thank you, Anna, and thank you, Darla. That was a great conversation. It makes me want to do more of these, because this is exactly the kind of discussion that we want to be having as part of the Sustainable Workforce Coalition. I'd love to turn it over to our co-hosts today, Stefan and Janet, just to close us up. And I will just say thank you to everybody for giving up their lunch break to hang out with us today.
Well, thank you, Andrew. I'm Janet Andrews. I'm the full-time officer at the New Westminster and District Labour Council. Happy to be here today. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm on the unceded and traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, and we're mindful of that as we gather here. And I just want to echo Andrew's thank you. Thank you so much to our amazing presenters, to David, to Anna and Darla. I really appreciate your time today. Appreciate everyone who has joined us and giving up your lunch, and hope you found some really thought-provoking and interesting information. This is the start of a conversation that we're excited to have, certainly from the labor movement. We know that we need to move in this direction and address climate, as well as addressing to make sure that when we address climate, we have good jobs. And so these two aspects of this are really important. I want to thank my partners, Andrew and the Sustainable Workforce Coalition, the folks at Vancouver Economic Commission. I see George Benson and Vanessa Sun are here as well. And of course, our partner in Metro, Stefan von Suchowski. I'll turn it over to you at Vancouver District Labour Council. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. Hi, everyone. Stefan von Suchowski, him, president of the Vancouver District Labour Council, and I'm joining from the unceded territories of the Katzie and Kwantlen First Nations. And just want to, second everything Janet said. Thanks to everyone who made this happen and who attended today. And before we wrap up and before we disperse, I want to draw attention to our next Lunch and Learn in this web series, which is coming up on December 6th, again from noon till 1. This one will be on apprenticeship and just transition, and it will feature Dr. John Calvert and Lee Loftus as guests, two individuals who are have a long, deep involvement in these issues and are doing important work, currently developing some work around apprenticeship and just transition. So it's going to be another very interesting conversation, and hope that you will join us then, and we'll see you then. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.